Hello everyone. Welcome to my first video lecture for Computer Science 2. I hope everyone's doing well today and is staying safe. So let's get right into it. Today we're going to talk about classes. Not classes at school. That's not allowed. What we're talking about is classes in JavaScript and in programming more generally, because this is not just a JavaScript concept. In fact, it's one that JavaScript has only come around to recently as it's become more of a serious language. So what a class is it is similar to a constructor function. So let's start off, let's make a constructor function like we have been, for the past week or two. I'm apparently very bad at typing. Now, let's make our good old friend the student function. We'll have it take in a name, a grade, and an address, because why not? And that's all we're going to bother with. Actually, we will bother with one more thing. We will bother with our good old friend, the graduate function, that elevates everybody by a year, or graduates them if they are in 12th grade. You guys might remember this from our previous assignments where we made students. It's just a good example function. So let's call that next year. Actually, we don't even want to make that an argument. We just want to define it in here. So obviously, right, we want to assign each of the properties of the student objects that we're making to our arguments, or rather we want to assign our argument values, like name, right, into our properties, just like normal. You guys know this from our last lessons. Whoop. Never forget your this, your t-hiss. So, this is looking pretty normal, but you might remember that in my example code for constructor functions, we also did something like this. Right? We stored a function inside of a property. Now, there's a lot of reasons you would want to do this. Part of the motivation for using objects is that you can put data and functionality together. So in other words, we've got our data, like our name, and we've got functionality, although not a whole lot of functionality right now because it's just a blank function. And I am not going to bother to fill it out. This is just, think of this as a placeholder for any function you might want to put. So I guess I could at least say this.grade plus 1. I guess I'll finish it out. It's not complicated. If this.grade is 12, then right. So if our grade on our student is 12 and we run this function, it will take them to graduated. Otherwise, it will increase by 1. Just going to prettier it to make it look all nice and neat. So this is our standard constructor function with one of our sort of more advanced features of putting a function into the object. And like I said, there's a lot of reasons you would want to do this. This lets you keep this function conceptually, in your brain. A lot of things in programming are about helping your brain keep everything straight. In your brain, this is and in the programming language itself, this is attached to this student. So if we make a student, so Johnny here, right? Johnny is not only Johnny the information that we've put into here. Johnny also comes when we say new student, because we put this next year function in, he comes with functionality attached. So I can immediately say something like Johnny dot next year. And then let's go ahead and console log Johnny's age so we can, or his grade, so we can prove, if we look down here, after that code runs, after next year runs, Johnny's grade has gone up by 1, right? Look down here in the console where my mouse is. We console logged 11, and I set him up with 10. So next year worked. And it's way more convenient. So the other way you might do this, right, is to say function next year, and then tell it a student to take in as an argument, and then say student dot grade blah blah blah. Just take this same code from up here, and everywhere that we've got this, instead it's student, right? This would work. And then what we would do is we would say next year Johnny, and we would be golden. But here's the thing. Conceptually, this next year function is just floating out in space. It's by itself. It's alone. And so if someone who was using your code, and I don't mean using the software, but someone who was, let's say, a team member working on your same project, they would not necessarily have any idea that the next year function was something that existed unless they went looking through your whole code base for it. Remember, a proper program often gets to thousands or tens of thousands of lines of code. If you just have a next year function sitting out in the middle of nowhere, that is harder to associate with our students than one that's actually attached to them, that we can see inside of that object and understand is there. So, you may be wondering, what on earth does this have to do with classes, Mr. Egan? And this is what it has to do with classes. Classes are a way to make it easier than this to attach functions to objects when we're making them. This is kind of ugly, right? We are doing something here that is a little strange. We're taking a property and we are assigning a function as a value to it. Now, this is a totally fine thing to do in JavaScript, but not in a lot of languages, by the way. A lot of languages you cannot set like a property equal to a function directly like this. And there are a lot of programmers that are not used to doing it this way. And this way is kind of cumbersome and ugly. So with that in mind, we now have classes. And so let's build our student here as a class instead. So I am just going to comment all of this out for right now so that it doesn't pop up any errors when I'm writing my classes. So let's make a class student instead. And what you do, you leave out the parentheses because this is, the class by itself is not a function. I want to be clear about that. A class is a container for functions. It is a way to put functions together. And every class has to have at least one function, and that function is its constructor. So this is a normal constructor function. It is, you have to name it constructor when it's inside of a class, because the class is actually the name of the function. If you were to dig deep into how this works, this gets turned into a constructor function like this one internally. But that is not something you need to worry about, except in the sense that you just need to know you always have to name your constructor when it's inside of a class. Otherwise, JavaScript does not understand that this is supposed to be the constructor. So in the constructor, you can do all of the things you can normally do. You could say this.name is Johnny, that sort of thing. All right, we can also give it arguments like normal. So we will give it the same 3 arguments, and in fact, I'm just going to copy this and decomment it. All right, so we've got an equivalent constructor function here, except we don't put next year in here because a class is a container for functions. And so all we do, so you notice we didn't have to write function in front of constructor. That's because it's assumed that anything that we write inside of a class that's got a name and then some parentheses is a function. We can leave the word function off because we know we're working inside of a class. It's a slightly different rule set here. So let's make another function. Let's make that next year function. And up here, we did not make it take anything in as a argument. So we won't make it take anything in down here either, because it's a function that is designed to operate on the student. And so we always have access to student through this, through this. So let me just grab this code right here, stick it in here, make it look nice. And now we have something that is completely equivalent to this constructor function up here, except it doesn't look as ugly. We are able to clearly sort of differentiate between the data that we are taking in about the student and the functions that are attached to it. They are separated. The constructor handles all the data, and then we've got a bunch of functions to handle everything else. And we could put however many functions in here we wanted, depending on what we wanted the student object to be able to do. So we might put a function to update the student's schedule, a function in case the student gets detention or gets suspended or something. There's all kinds of different things that, in a system like PowerSchool, the software has to be able to do to the student. And so to the student record. And so when you are constructing a large program, you always want to make sure, in general, that you are composing that program in a way where the functionality is close to the data. In other words, it's all tied up to where your data and the code that operates on that data are in the same place, but are also easily distinguished. And so that's the point of a class. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about today with regards to classes. Oh, I guess I should show off one last thing. I know, even in a video lecture, I have the habit of saying one last thing. One last thing, let me show you this at work. So let's go ahead and make Johnny. Let's make Johnny. Let Johnny equal new student. Yes, you still use new. It's a constructor and what you are actually, the arguments to this, this expression, this new student, are the arguments of the constructor. So that's why we don't put any parentheses on the class. We put them on the constructor function itself. And so we just put in the same information as before. Johnny is Johnny, his grade is 10, and he lives at 123 Placeholder Lane. And then I can say Johnny.next year. And by the way, if you're using something like VS Code, right? When you type the dot and you have made, and this is a thing in REPL too, although it's not always as reliable, it will show you all of the things that are available after that dot. That's part of the reason why using classes is nice, because if it was a separate function, like up here, then we wouldn't be able to rely on our autocomplete to say, hey, there is a next year function that is related to students, that does something to students. And so let's go ahead and run that, and console log Johnny.grade. And this should give us exactly the same result as before. I will clear my console so it's really clear. We get 11. And so that really is it. That is all I wanted to talk about today. Tomorrow there will be an assignment on REPL about classes. Please go ahead and get into contact with me anytime during the school day if you need some help with that, or are unsure about anything. I will do my best to make sure all the automated tests are 100% in good shape, because I know that will be way harder for us to get lined out remotely. So, this has been our first video lecture. Let me know if there was anything wrong with it so I can tweak my setup. And I will talk to you all very soon. Have a great day, guys.